Hey, hello, everybody. Welcome to our next in a series of Colleagues and Conversations. It's great to have you here. I think we have a really good program set up for this evening. A couple of things. If you registered for continuing education credits, you'll get the credits in the email. Tracy Ashworth, who's usually our person, couldn't be with us today, so Linda Kelly, whose name says Tracy Ashworth, but it's really Linda Kelly. She's kind enough to join us and facilitate for us. So let me just, again, welcome you. This is great. We've had a really good turnout the past few months, and I'm looking forward to this ongoing for the rest of this year. I mean, Dr. Michaels, Linda has a really great talk for us today. In next month in May, uh, um, Dr. Roth will speak to us about groups and group psychotherapy, which is something we talk about a lot at Yellow Brick. And then the following month, Art Nielsen will talk to us. That would be June. Art Nielsen will talk to us about couples therapy in his new book. And then in July, Robert Gallitzer-Levy will join us and talk to us about sort of institutional racism in the consulting room. And he always has something fascinating to say. And then in August, Sarah Mena is going to join us and speak to us about adoption, which is another thing that we talk a lot about at Yellow Brick. So stay tuned and keep with us. Okay, Linda Michaels is a psychologist with a private practice in Chicago. She is chair and co-founder of the Psychotherapy Action Network, which is really a fantastic organization, a grassroots nonprofit organization that advocates for therapies of depth, insight, and relationship. She is a consulting editor of Psychoanalytic Inquiry, clinical associate faculty at the Chicago Center for Psychoanalysis, and a fellow of the Lauder Institute Global MBA program. She is author and co-editor of Advancing Psychotherapy for the Next Generation, Humanizing Mental Health Policy and Practice, and has published, presented, and been interviewed in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, National Public Radio, and other national media on the value of psychotherapy, the therapeutic relationship, and technology. And the public narrative about therapy, which is really important, and it tends to be usurped by the insurance companies. Linda has a former career in business with over 15 years experience consulting to organizations in the US and Latin America. In addition to her doctorate degree in clinical psychology from the Illinois School of Professional Psychology, Linda is a graduate of the Chicago Psychoanalytic Institute's Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy program. And it's really a treat for me to introduce Linda tonight because we sort of intersected a number of years ago with the Chicago Association of Psychoanalytic Psychology when Linda was just beginning as a therapist. So you've done some great things, Linda, and it's great to have you here. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thanks, Michael. Thanks so much. Yes, it's been a few years, but yeah, it's great to reconnect with you here. And thanks so much to you and Jesse for inviting me and for your support of Psychotherapy Action Network. It really is so vital and so important. Um, and yeah, I'm here today to share with all of you the results of research that we have done with the public to really go outside of our consulting room and to ask the public what they think, feel, associate, hope for um, regarding therapy and therapists. And so I think it's so important that we really listen to the public in these ways, similar to how we listen to our patients. And we've really been able to do some unique research. So I'm excited to talk with you about all of that, what we learned from the public. And yeah, and Michael, as you said, our phrase at Psychotherapy Action Network is therapies of depth, insight, and relationship. And that is really a broad and big umbrella under which many therapies can fit. So, of course, psychoanalytic, uh, humanistic, existential, attachment focused, IFS parts work, embodied approaches. I mean, many different therapies hold these principles near and dear. And that's what we're aiming for, is to bring together all of these therapies so that we can stand up for them and promote them and advocate for them when, Michael, as you also alluded to, so much of the narrative as well as the reimbursement and the terms under which we work are defined by other corporate entities. So that's sort of at the root of PsiAN, and I'm happy to talk about the organization towards the end if anyone has any questions about that. But what I'd like to really focus on is the research that we've done. And so I have the consultant in me can't go anywhere without a PowerPoint. So I have a PowerPoint to share with you. I'm going to share my screen and we'll walk through that. Okay. So just to adjust this window a little bit. There we go. Okay. So going beneath the surface, what people need and want from therapy. Here's what we'll go through today, a little bit about our project, the background for the project, why we wanted to do it, what our methodology, what we did, and then what we learned. And 2023 findings, we did do a similar round of research that was actually a little bit more extensive in 2020. So we have this kind of pre-pandemic, post-pandemic read on the public. And so I'll be kind of highlighting what some of the differences are from today compared to 2020 as we go through. So let's just think a little bit about prevailing messages about mental health treatment. I see this one a lot. Ask your doctor about CBT or medication. Where do I see that? Well, in many articles in the New York Times. That's sort of how they sign off their articles at the end when they have an article about mental health or mental illness or something like that. And then there's this. CBT is what people need. Who's saying this? Well, everyone else. And this is what we hear a lot about, and I'm certainly not here to say negative things about CBT or medication. They are very important and useful and effective ways to help people. So I want to be very clear. I'm not saying anything negative about them whatsoever. They are certainly a tool in our large toolkit, but these are the treatments that get focused on and get funded most commonly. And therapies of depth, insight, and relationship often are excluded. And so, I want to really, also point out that even though we are applying CBT and medication treatments in great numbers, and there are more therapists trained today in CBT than ever before, and more people taking medication than ever before. What is this about suffering continuing to rise? What is not working in this equation? We can also say that, it's just not that easy to help people. And it's not as easy as some of these manualized approaches might have us think. And this is a painting from Bosch. In 1494, he knew it just wasn't this easy. This is a painting of the figure on the left wearing the dunce cap, the surgeon, aka a charlatan, actually performing a surgery on this hapless patient, removing the stone of madness. So we know there is no stone of madness. It cannot be easily removed. If that existed, and if it could be, we would all be in a much different place. Here, Now, going from it's not that easy, it's really not that easy when we think about the mental health landscape. This slide is one that was created by University of Michigan MBA students who worked with us at Psychotherapy Action Network on a project, not this research project that we're talking about today, but a different project that we were doing at PsiAN. And they came up with this map of the mental health landscape. And I absolutely have no idea what this slide is supposed to say. But, if I can't understand it, then I don't really think anyone out there can understand it either. And I think maybe that's the point of the slide, is that the mental health landscape is incredibly confusing and convoluted and really, really difficult to navigate, especially if you're working in it. So let's just think about the people who are trying to seek out help. This is what they're confronted with. So, given this backdrop of these frequently applied treatments that are really not showing effectiveness in reducing suffering and this very confusing landscape, we said, okay, let's think about what we can do about this from this research perspective. Why is this project, our research, needed? Well, no surprise to anyone here tonight that therapies of depth, insight, and relationship have been under attack from multiple fronts for many years. Of course, there is the impact of managed care, which wants to pay for as little treatment as possible of any sort. The pharmaceutical industry wants to, of course, bypass therapy altogether and steer people towards their own products that they're selling. Many public policies are understandably constrained and, of course, focused on cost containment. And then, we also know there's actually a lot of bias in academic publication. What actually makes it into a publication, what gets filed in the circular if it's not a positive result. And there's a lot of bias in research funding. And a lot of that is, of course, going to treatments that are short and therefore easier to study. And we end up with a lot of the evidence base being comprised of studies that are really about what happens in a laboratory setting and not all that similar to what happens in the real world with real world patients. And I'm actually part of another group that has been looking at what the NIMH has been funding in terms of research. And that group, we've analyzed all the studies that NIMH has funded over a number of years. And we're trying to get that paper published right now. And again, no surprise probably to anyone here, but the majority of what NIMH is spending its money on is funding research into brain physiology and neurochemistry. And when it is funding studies that focus on treatment, it's focused on medication to a large extent. Therapy is only a really small percentage, and then, therapy of any depth is just it's just non-existent. So, all across the board, there's just been not very much attention paid to these therapies. And, of course, who wouldn't prefer a quick fix or that stone, extracting that stone of madness in one fell swoop? Of course, I would prefer that too, if it really existed. And, and then we have all the contributions that the psychoanalytic community has made to this problem in terms of excluding itself from the research realm and from universities and from, other parts of the public and therapy populations. And that would be a whole other talk, which we're not going to do tonight. But, we have certainly made our own contributions to this issue of being marginalized. And, we wanted to really use these market research tools that a colleague, Santiago Del Bois, and I have great familiarity with from our first careers. It's kind of funny. Santiago and I were both in business consulting as first careers and have MBAs and did that for a long time. And then did not know each other in that world, but then independently both became therapists, and both are in Chicago. And we said, hey, we have some tools, we have some methodologies that are used in corporate America to study problems that are just like this one, where a brand or a company or a suite of products are being marginalized. Let's apply these tools to therapy and see what we learn. So importantly, at the bottom, again, I want to reiterate that, of course, we didn't know what we were going to find going into this research, but we did know that the answer would be to not discredit other therapeutic approaches, but to really focus on what people are looking for, what therapies of depth, insight, and relationship can offer, and is there any bridge that can be built between the two. So when I say branding tools, a branding problem, I don't know exactly what associations pop into your mind, but from talking with other colleagues, I know that it's not always positive. And I want to say just a word about what branding is and what it isn't. We might think that branding is like a slogan or a logo or something on your sneakers or something like that, the swoosh. But really, those are just, far from what a brand actually is. A brand is really about communication. It's really about engagement with an audience. It's really built on a relationship. And I think those actually are things that therapists know a whole lot about. We might not know a lot about branding, but we know a lot about those principles. And on the right-hand side of the slide, we focused on trying to understand the general population. Of course, there are many other audiences we could have and want to research similarly. But for our purposes today, I just have data and research with the general population. And just one more word about branding, because it's come up in the past. There are a lot of really well-respected and well-loved nonprofits that focus on branding day in and day out. And, the World Wildlife Fund, it's their single greatest asset. So again, I think it's a very relevant concept for us to be considering in the work that we're doing and the research here today. So what was that research? What do we do? What we did again was an update and a refresh to what we did to part of what we did in 2020. But here in the middle, this method, it was an online survey, a sample size of over 1,500 respondents. So it's a really robust sample size. And it went out, we did hire a professional market research company to obtain this sample of respondents. We wrote the survey and everything like that, but they executed it so that we could be assured that there would be a sample that was representative of the US population in terms of age, gender, geographic region, income, and race, ethnicity. So we really wanted to make sure we got that kind of a sample, which we would not have been able to do on our own. So we paid for that piece of it. And yeah, this is very similar to the survey approach that we used in 2020. Also in 2020, before we did the quantitative survey, we had a qualitative research arm, which is very common. We did a lot of interviews, in-depth interviews with people to surface thoughts and feelings and develop our hypotheses, which we then tested quantitatively. Okay, so let's dive into the findings. So first, we had a series of questions just about how people are feeling in life these days. It's kind of interesting. We didn't even really think to have this kind of a section in 2020, pre-pandemic. but we felt, a couple years later into the pandemic, that it was really important to get a read on just where people are at right now. And so we asked them, how are you feeling? What are some stressors that you're experiencing or have experienced over the last 12 months? And I just side note, I do know there's a lot of information on each slide. So I'm going to, try to help focus us in on the important stuff. So here we can see stressors over the last 12 months. Top stressors are financial, making ends meet, and concerns about the inflation and economy, personal health and medical, family, aging, I think things that make a lot of sense. And I'll also say, we collected a lot of demographic information on each of those 1,500 plus people who filled out the survey. I'll also try and point out some highlights of that as we go along. But basically, I think the one highlight that stood out to me on this kind of a question was that the younger folks, the Gen Zs, who are like 18 to 26 years old, yellow brick population, reported just a lot more stressors than anybody else. So just a lot more family, life transition, employment, friend issues, things like work pressure, things like that, just a lot more stressors. So I know you guys know you have your work cut out for you. Then we said, well, okay, all those stressors, could you have used more emotional support in the last year? On the left-hand side, we see, yes, 75% of our sample said, yes, we could have used more emotional support in the last year. On the right-hand side, we asked about relationships, because we all know how important relationships are to support and to therapy. And we said, compared to the past, you have more or fewer close relationships. And about half the population said, it's about the same. But a third, 34%, said they actually had fewer close relationships than they did in the past. So I think in that sense, the pandemic, has really taken a toll on relationships and people feeling connected and supported with their friends and family. So then we wanted to get a sense of which stressors were affecting their mental health in which ways. And so we can see here that really rising to the top of the list are anxiety, feeling sad or depressed, feeling overwhelmed by life, frustrated with themselves, not feeling like life is going the way they want it to, and feeling lonely or isolated. And that, kind of goes along with having fewer relationships and with the pandemic. And that also, that loneliness was, documented very thoroughly by the Surgeon General recently. So, and again, the main highlight demographically on this slide was that the Gen Zs were more likely to have just more of these impacts on their mental health. So so we don't know if that's more complaints or less capacity to deal with them or some combination thereof. But in a nutshell, yeah, folks are suffering out there. So with all of that as a backdrop, then we wanted to ask about attitudes towards therapy and mental health specifically, and also take a look at what's changed, what's not changed since March of 2020. So we asked people to start out what they would do if they wanted to start therapy. And so this first question here, if I wanted to start therapy, I know the steps to take and the resources I'd use to find a therapist. The orange bars are the current responses. And you can see we did not ask this question at all in this way in 2020. So that's why there's not a second bar underneath that. But for most of the other items, you'll see an orange bar, which is for now, and a red bar, which is a 2020 response. So now, compared to 2020, most people, half the people are saying, yeah, I know the steps I would take to find a therapist or start therapy. Now, again, whether they actually have done that or whether they actually know what the steps are, we have no idea, but they are reporting this, that they feel they are knowledgeable about it. And it kind of makes sense. I mean, there's been so much more, I think, about mental health in the news and apps to match people to therapists and things like that. So the second question, if I wanted to start therapy, I have a good idea of the kind of therapy that would work better for me. A slight increase in that, 29% say, yes, I agree or strongly agree. I know what kind of therapy would work for me. I don't know. We'll see as we go along. There are really a lot of things where the public has a lot of doubt and question and uncertainty. So I'm not really sure. I take that with a grain of salt. Then we asked origins of mental health issues, like where do you think mental health issues or problems kind of come from? This first item was a new one we added in 2023. And we added this, of course, we should have had it in 2020, but, with all of the issues and struggles regarding race and social issues that came out during the pandemic so clearly, but of course have been there forever. We asked specifically, social issues like poverty and racism have a major impact on mental health. 55% strongly agree with that. And then secondly, relationships. Problems with past and present relationships play a major role in the reasons that bring people to therapy. And I think that probably both resonates with our own experience with our patients, and then I think is also a very good sign for relationally based therapies, because I think people are recognizing, yeah, there are relational problems and patterns that have come from the past that are playing out today. And so I think those kinds of ideas, can really make people interested in relational depth therapy, and also primed for that in some ways. I also want to point out towards the bottom of the list here, 18% mental health problems are mainly about chemical imbalances in the brain. Finally, maybe that myth is starting to die. So I'm glad to see that is towards the bottom of the list for the public. Okay, so why do people seek therapy? Well, this is actually really great news for depth therapy. We said, why do people seek therapy? And here's what the top 3 answers. The most valuable aspect of therapy is sharing your thoughts and feelings without feeling judged or ashamed. Makes sense. I think that's kind of a basic starting point for any therapy to really get off the ground. Secondly, the main goal of therapy is to better understand yourself and the root of your issues. I mean, this is almost 70% of people agreeing with this statement, which is, I think, really tremendous to this concept of getting to the root. And then thirdly, the main goal is to learn skills and coping strategies to manage thoughts and emotions, which definitely makes sense. If we look scan down the list towards the bottom, 30%, 37%, people are not looking to therapy to change behavior, which is interesting. They're not even looking for these kind of generic sounding things like here in the middle of the pack, 49%. The main goal of therapy is to feel better about yourself. People are more specific. They have more specific goals than that. They want to get to the root and really understand themselves. And then interestingly, the very bottom of the list, despite what we saw on the previous slide, where dealing with social issues was at the top of the list in terms of causing mental health issues, or having mental health impacts. Here, it's at the bottom of the list in terms of working on these issues in therapy. So again, it's quantitative research. We don't know why people answered it this way. Maybe people are not looking to therapy to address these kinds of issues. Maybe they haven't encountered therapists where that's happened. We just don't know why, but and maybe that will also change over time. Oh, that one's an interesting one to keep track of. So regarding views on therapy, a number of different aspects about therapy across a range of topics, I think this is actually more really good news for depth therapy. So people continue from 2020, continue to believe that therapy takes time and is a worthy investment. And a significant number of people value understanding the past. So these top three answers: emotional and psychological problems inherently take time to understand and resolve. Now, out of all these things that we asked people about therapy, this was at the very top of their list. Secondly, going to therapy is an investment in oneself that is worth making. I think that's tremendous that people see therapy as such a valuable activity and literally an investment in themselves. And then thirdly, we added this new statement because we got these same results in 2020, and we wanted to add something to try to flesh out a little bit more. What does this get to the root? Like, what is that about? And so we added this statement: therapy that explores the past is more effective because it gets to the root of the problem. So 40% strongly or agreed with that. So that's might be in the ballpark of something about what getting to the root kind of means to people. Then we asked about the therapy experience, and people really, loud and clear, they know the relationship is key. And so I think that's also, very good news. That good relationship is necessary. It's foundational. Those top two things for therapy to work: it's very important therapist and patient get along, have a good relationship. Of course, we would, we have studied that so much, we would, talk about that differently in professional circles, but we tried to put it in, kind of a public facing way here. And then, it's, so people, I think, know that the relationship is very important, but after that, you can see the numbers really shrink down quickly. There's not a lot of agreement on what that relationship should actually look like. So that's interesting. Let's just pick out a few of these. I mean, I prefer a therapist who sets the agenda. Now that did not resonate. Or gives me homework. Those are kind of in the middle here. That did not resonate very much. Towards the bottom of the list, you see 16% prefer a therapist of same racial or cultural background as me. People are saying that's not really that important. So I think that's very interesting. I will say for that item of racial cultural background, that was relatively more important for people of color and for gender nonconforming folks. But overall, for the whole sample, it was towards the bottom of the list. So yeah, kind of a range. But I also want to point out this third one. I'm going back up to the third item in therapy, talking about the relationship between therapist and patient can be useful. About a third of people said yes. That means it was not that compelling to 2/3 of the people. So I think that kind of speaks to the transference. And the people, I don't think in a public mass communication way we should really be overly focused on that, saying things like that we would work in the transference or things like that. Actually, when I'm remembering some of the in-depth interviews that I did in 2020, the very start of the whole research project, I talked to people about talking to their therapist about how they feel about the therapist and the relationship and things like that. And people just didn't get it. They said, well, why would I do that? I don't have any issues with my therapist. Like, my issues are with my spouse or my parent, and some people got visibly uncomfortable and their mood dropped. So of course it would be totally different when you're in your consulting room, working however you would work with the transference. But again, as far as kind of a mass communication about that, I would not recommend that. Okay, and now here, kind of summing it up, this was a forced choice. People had to choose one or the other. We reworded from a little bit from 2020 to 2023 because we thought, my gosh, in 2020 is 91 to 9%. This was so wild. Maybe we like biased the the answers or something. Let's tone it down a little bit. But still, you could see virtually the same percentages in 2023. So the question is, if you were looking to start therapy, which option would you choose? Which would be more appealing? A therapy that takes fewer sessions, helps you manage symptoms, but doesn't necessarily address root cause, or a therapy that may take longer because it helps you manage symptoms and also addresses root cause. Overwhelmingly, people are willingly signing up for the longer therapy to be able to address those, to get to the root, so to speak. So this is I think a really compelling result because it is so strong, and also it aligns with what we know about the evidence base about what really leads to long-lasting change for people. And it's also supported by the generally accepted standards of care. So I think it's kind of amazing that the public, is saying, yes, this is what I want. So I want to get this in front of some insurance companies and see what they have to say about this. So experiences in therapy, we wanted to understand what some people were actually, those people who had gone or are going to therapy, what are they experiencing? And we had a fair percentage of people in our sample that who have that therapy experience. And then we had some questions for everyone else, regardless of whether they've ever been to therapy. So this was for folks who are or have been in therapy in the past 3 years. We asked them, what kind of therapy were you doing? You could see at the top of the list, CBT, most common, mindfulness-based, psychoanalysis or psychoanalytic, 11%, and it goes down from there. We see psychodynamic at 2%, so that's incredibly low. I think that's a common term among therapists, but it's not a very common term among the public. I even remember, again, from one of the interviews I did with somebody back in 2020, I asked a similar question, and they said they had never heard this word psychodynamic before. I said, okay, well, just, tell me what pops into your head when you think about that word. And they said psychodynamic, psycho, maybe mind, maybe crazy, dynamic, motion, movement. They said, aha, I bet this is a dance therapy. So it's very interesting what people will come up with and what they associate to. But there's at least one person out there who thinks psychodynamic therapy is a dance therapy. The most common answer, of course, is I don't know or I don't remember, which I'm sure we've all had experiences like this. It's making me think of, there was in my office suite, there was an analyst who during the pandemic actually retired and referred some patients to me. And one of her patients came in and said that, what she really wanted to do with me was to really continue that CBT she had been doing with her psychoanalyst. So who knows what people make of all of this. Okay. So we asked, what are you experiencing in therapy? Kind of what do you think is happening? And we can see that getting to root causes, managing symptoms, and identifying repeating patterns are the things that people think are happening, or that are happening, or that they're experiencing most commonly in therapy. So I think that's very interesting that people do feel that they are whatever it is that they're doing, they do feel they're getting to the root cause. Then we said, okay, what do you think? What is your therapist doing in therapy? Most commonly, you see at the top of the list, the therapist is validating. Then the therapist usually lets me start the session, and then after that, things drop off. So I don't know what this means. Therapist validates. I mean, I know we all do a lot of validation for our patients and clients. I don't know how to really map that onto sort of what kind of therapy is happening, or what orientation is going on that could really apply to any sort of therapy, I guess. We included in this list a mix of what we thought, a depth therapist and a more structured therapist might do. So a big range here. Just go all the way to the bottom of the list. 5%, my therapist barely talks. That's good news. I think maybe that blank slate, or that, kind of the extreme is sort of not happening that much anymore, and there is more relational interaction. How do people find their therapist? I thought this was very interesting. Number one, they go to their insurance website to check whether what the insurance network is. Number two, they go to their doctor. Again, we don't really know what people have done or will do, but I think this concept of the doctor potentially as a gatekeeper is very important and interesting to think about. After that, further down on the list, people are searching online. There were a few demographic groups that were a little bit more likely to search online, and those were younger folks, as you might imagine, and also lower income folks, and Black and Hispanic folks. Interesting, but the rank order was still the same. Everybody, all demographic groups had the same rank order. So I think it would be really interesting to do some research with doctors, PCPs, internists, maybe gynecologists, to understand how they think about referrals potentially for therapy. Okay, what are you looking for? What criteria are you looking to in order to select a therapist? Insurance coverage and convenient location are at the top of the list. So I think insurance coverage speaks to, people being mindful of the cost, and convenient location in this day and age when everyone is doing telehealth, which is obviously how we're meeting tonight. It's really fascinating that location is number two. So I think this speaks again to the relationship, or the potential for a relationship, that people are still really interested in that in-person option. A couple things on this slide. Would you consider finding a therapist? Now we're going to the whole sample, not just only people who have been in therapy. Would you consider finding a therapist? Yes, 45%, no, 55%. So this is right off the bat, 55% said, no, I would not consider going to a therapist, period. And we asked them, well, why not? And top of the list, therapy is too expensive. So we'll see over and over again in different ways, this issue of cost and affordability really being so, so important. Then we asked those people who said, I won't go to therapy, it's too expensive. we asked those folks an additional question. Okay, why is therapy too expensive? And here's what they said. They said, well, the cost is per session. It's probably too expensive. I just couldn't fit it into my budget. I mean, again, they've never gone to therapy, but these were just some ideas that they have. The perceived cost is just too much. It's just out of reach for them. So I think that we really have to think about this when we're thinking about things like access and affordability and caring for people, you know, who can't afford it or don't think they can afford it. Thoughts about working with a therapist. This, I think, is fascinating. What's at the top of the list? One of the most important things would be to make sure all of my information is kept private. You can do that when you're in your office working, but you know, these online apps and things like that really struggled and have had lots of data breaches and even given away client information to Facebook. So people know that, and people know how important privacy and confidentiality is. Secondly, they prefer to work with a therapist based in their local community, a real person, just like you or me, and not somebody who's just a little dot on a screen on an app. So I think this is actually very fascinating. We also tested further down in the list some of the actual advertising claims that companies like the BetterHelps and Talkspaces are advertising. So, 28%. The option to switch my therapist at any time with one click is very important to me. That's like a huge selling feature of these apps. And people say, no, it's not important. And then again, 28%, it's important for my therapist to be available to me anytime I want to communicate with them. Not so much. People don't think that's important. So I think this is also really good news to see that people are not that interested in what these apps are trying to sell them. I mean, these apps are selling what they can sell, which are these types of features with the technology, but it's not important to people. We also know it's not important to the therapy process. So that's good news. Would you consider any kind of apps? And here we see, I think this makes sense. 69 on the right-hand side, it's a little easier to read these inverted numbers, but 69% said, yes, I would consider apps. So I think that also makes sense. That's a reality. Down at 12% is a question about apps with AI. That's still really, really far down on people's list. I imagine that'll increase over time. That'll be interesting to track people's openness to using AI. And then how do you want to do therapy? I was blown away by this, 90% in person, 90% in person, 72% video. Phone is way, way down. So people, I think, really want, you know, that at least that visual if they're using technology. And then at the very bottom, text. And so I think this is actually fascinating and really good news for relationally oriented depth therapists to people want to meet in person. And I'm seeing more and more people in my practice coming in and wanting to come in person. So I will also say for texting at the very bottom of the list, the one, if we were all together, I would I would ask for some responses here, but maybe you can put it in the chat. The one demographic age group that was not at all interested in texting their therapist. The young folks, surprisingly. The young folks, the Gen Zs, 18 to 24, not interested in texting their therapist. So they're probably texting like all day everybody else, but they don't want to text their therapist, which I thought was really interesting. So if we bring together kind of all of this data, all of these findings, we try to condense it into a framework that we can use to communicate to the public. Now, this is at a mass communication level. This is like not necessarily how you would describe personally your practice or how you would talk to a patient individually. This is at a mass level, bringing all of this data together. How do we want to be communicating to the public about what therapy is and what they can expect from it? We developed this framework to talk about that. So in the lower right, sort of the basic kind of must-have of therapy is this concept of feeling heard. That therapy is a place where you'll be heard and understood without judgment. So I think that's, again, pretty much a starting point for any therapy. Secondly, key functional benefit, like what can you get out of therapy? We summarize that by a theme we're calling change and choice. So therapy is a place where you can change old patterns, behavior, thoughts, feelings, relationships, to open up new choices for yourself in your life. The key emotional benefit people can associate or expect from therapy is this concept of worth it, which both indicates that the therapy itself is a worthwhile experience or activity, which people told us, and also that they themselves are worth having this experience. It's an investment, and it's an investment they can make in themselves. And then the most differentiating factor is this concept of getting to the root. That is something that therapies of depth, insight, and relationship, I think, are particularly good at helping people do. And so this getting to the root, understanding the past, having more self-awareness, and self-understanding, those kinds of things. So I think this is kind of would be a summary of the core messages that would resonate the most with the public based on all this research, what they told us is most important to them. When we think about kind of putting that into action, perhaps, and communicating to the public, psychoanalysis, psychoanalytic psychotherapy as an entity, as a brand, if you will, has a lot to overcome. I won't go through all of these things, but CBT has a lot of advantages in the mind of the public over psychoanalysis. It's pretty much everything you can think of. CBT holds an advantage. It's long lasting, it's relevant, and one of the main advantages that psychoanalysis has over CBT, there are two I want to point out. One, it helps get to the root, so that's really good. But it's expensive. That's not good. And then at the bottom of the list on the left, people told us pretty clearly that they believe the analyst is actually not empathic. Analysts are not good listeners and would not be good partners in this therapy process. So I think this is very, very concerning that these are the associations people have to psychoanalysis today, and psychoanalysis, psychoanalytic psychotherapy. So this is very, very important, and would need to be overcome by in order for people to be more interested in pursuing psychoanalytic therapy. So how do people learn about therapy, and how do these associations develop? Well, to a large extent, it's kind of like all the nonverbal lessons that, sort of surround us as we're growing up in our families. I mean, it's sort of, that's the advertising that surrounds us and permeates our space today publicly. So BetterHelp last year spent $100 million in advertising, just podcast advertising. So when you listen to a podcast, if you have a little BetterHelp ad at the beginning, sponsored by BetterHelp, they spent $100 million buying those ads last year on all kinds of podcasts. So Talkspace is doing the same, and then retailers are getting into the act. So advertising and venture capital. This is also why at PsiAN we had a big project last year, a big campaign to try to help educate people about apps. And provided some emails that they can send to podcasters and say, hey, this is what's really going on. Please reconsider accepting this advertising money. So this is this is a big problem. And Amazon, yes, is getting into mental health, and they call it therapy/coaching. So Amazon will be selling coaching and dressing it up as therapy in their deal with One Medical. Here is what is happening on the AI front. Some of you may be aware of this. This is a screenshot of a website that has since been taken down after a journalist published an article about it. But this website called therapyforall.nyc, and I will just share that Therapy for All is the tagline for Talkspace. That's perhaps a major coincidence, perhaps not. But this Therapy for All website was saying, hey, please record your therapy session, upload the audio to our website here, and we'll send you an Amazon gift card. So, yep, that's it. $50 gift card per session uploaded. And I think this is what, these companies now are doing to collect data, to collect therapy session transcripts to train their AIs, so that at some point in the future, it will be therapy by AI. And here is another app that is new. It's called MioMind. Therapy for Everyone is their tagline. The world's first on-demand alternative to therapy. And Bruce Wempold and John Norcross are on their advisory board. And this is an app that is totally free to individuals whose employers have purchased access to this for them. And there are over 600 recorded therapy sessions. So it's a recording of an actual therapy session, of somebody else's therapy session, categorized by different problems or diagnoses. And you can go to this MioMind and select different therapy sessions and listen to them. And that's it. I mean, that's the product. And then you could take a PHQ-9. I mean, that's it. So listening to somebody else's therapy session is supposedly vicariously supposed to be useful to somebody. And they say that their mission is to provide 1 billion people with instant access to the benefits of evidence-based psychotherapy. And they are going for, they say this is unlimited scale, and they call this, therapy for everyone. So I encourage all of you to let people learn about therapy from you, from us, not from these apps, not from these lookalike products that are out there. So what would that mean? That would mean educating yourself and your patients on different kinds of therapy. What are psychoanalysts doing CBT? What is happening in your room? Non-therapy products like self-help tools, apps, or coaching, which of course can be useful to people, but they are not therapy. Insurance abuses. Talk to your patients about these, understand yourself what is going on, all the different ways that the insurance industry breaks the law and rations care. What are the generally accepted standards of care? I mean, these things, again, would be a whole separate presentation, but those have been defined in the WIT UBH class action lawsuit. There's 8 of them, and they provide excellent support for depth therapy. So these things are things that I think we need to be as well versed in as all the stuff that we learned in grad school and in our postgraduate training, because this is what is impacting and affecting therapy today. And so I would encourage all of you to however you might want to do it, to engage in some active advocacy of your own. What does that mean? Start using those 4 pillars, that framework that we talked about. You will be sure to connect with people out in the public. Those messages will resonate with them. Know that the therapy you're providing is evidence-based. And there's lots of different ways to do this, from writing your own articles, which I know no one has time for, even just to having a conversation with somebody, um, spreading this kind of information. So if we are all out there spreading these kinds of messages, I hope, along with what we and others are trying to do as well, that we will help turn the tide and create a better informed public, who is really, really interested in therapy and getting to the root and all of those really good things, but needs some help finding us and finding their way. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda. That's quite evocative and in some ways, in some parts, provocative. And I could ask a lot of questions, but let's pause for a moment or two to see what questions come through, because it really is evocative information and thought-provoking. So you can put your questions in chat and I will read them, or they can be read by everybody. To start out, I mean, do you have this is a real general question. This got all my research juices going, which I don't often get a chance to use in terms of like statistics and that kind of thing. But do you have a general sense of the sample breakdown? Like age, gender?
So I don't remember all of the numbers, but the breakdown, the criteria that we gave the market research firm that we hired to execute this, we told them we want a sample that is representative of the US population on these variables. So whatever the breakdown is in the US population of gender, that's the same as in our sample of the 1,500. So the races, geographic region. So we have, people representing all of the, 4 or 5 major geographic regions in the country. I can't remember if we use 4 or 5. Income and age. So whatever the distributions are in the US population, that is exactly what's reflected in our sample.
Who funds the research largely?
Well, PsiAN did. We did. Yeah.
Okay. So through your own fundraising and
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. And we invested in that, and we have, a lot more that we would like to research. And so, but yeah, we feel strongly that being able to do original research or secondary research, is really important. So yeah, we invested our own funds in that.
Right. Well, and and thank you, because it's really important, and it's really important that it's independent research and that isn't tied to any kind of obligation somebody might have, like an insurance company, or even, sometimes even in universities that are funded from outside sources.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do have, a mission that's aligned with therapies of depth, insight, and relationship, and we obviously have a position on that. So yeah, but we're not really selling. We're not making any money off of this. That's so we don't have that influencing or our work. But yeah, we do have a perspective.
What's the biggest challenge you faced, or the biggest challenge you faced in presenting this information? I imagine you present this to different groups or different interests. What have you been met with? What sort of challenges have you had?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I think some of maybe you got the sense for this sort of at the beginning when I was like, what is branding? What is market research? I mean, I think those kinds of tools or concepts are really different. I mean, we might be really familiar with academic research, peer-reviewed research. This is market research, which is very different. It is done differently for different purposes, for different reasons, to learn different kinds of things. There's been some questions about, what is this, what is branding? Like, is that something we really want to get our hands dirty with? Kinds of things. But I think in general, I think once people see the kind of information, it's kind of a really unique opportunity to get, a pretty more than just a glimpse. I mean, a pretty good understanding of what the public thinks and feels about what we do, which I think is pretty unique. And we don't really often, I mean, like I said before, we listen so much, so intently to our patients, but really at a, kind of a public, at a scale like this, I don't think have, done a really good job listening to the public and trying to talk and engage with them.
So James, I don't know if you're reading that, Weiner asks, you indicated that suffering is increasing. Has there been any progress to get professional groups to spread the word?
Yeah, to spread the word, I mean, I think I'm not quite sure what that's referring to, but I mean, there are so many, I think, maybe James, if you want to elaborate on that, there's so many statistics that indicate that, suicidality and depression, anxiety, I mean, so many different ways that is measured, that's increasing, particularly in our country. And I'm not sure if you meant spread the word about our research or spread the word about that, but the suffering aspect of it. But I would love for as many people as possible to be aware of the bigger picture, that people are suffering and what they're suffering from, and that it seems professional groups support short-term solutions. Yeah, I think a lot of them do. And as we see in our research, that is not of interest to people, right? 90% said they would rather sign up for a therapy that takes longer. Like, who says that? Well, 90% of the public is saying that. So to them, they want the results and they want to get to the root and they want to understand themselves and they want to solve their life problems. And that's what they want. They don't want just the shortest, quickest thing available.
Evening, Linda, and to everybody. I want to thank you for the presentation and for the research project and for the really powerful, thoughtful advocacy that PsiAN is doing. Just a few comments. So the supposed dichotomy between CBT and psychoanalysis. So one of my supervisors and mentors, colleagues at the Institute was John Ghetto, who really is one of the premier giants of psychoanalytic theory and practice for the 20th century. He once said to me that psychoanalysis is the most powerful form of cognitive behavioral therapy. So, and that really was a Freudian perspective as well. That's how Freud thought about it, but that it occurs within a relational context, and that, we can't really learn and change our minds and our hearts outside of a relational context. But he was, not inhibited about sharing information about the world to his analysis. I think you mentioned a couple of headwinds that we're very familiar with at Yellowbrick. So one is that psychoanalytic approaches are viewed as, some form of kind of voodoo woo-foo, and that CBT and the skills-based therapies are the only ones that have evidence base. And so we have on our website, a bunch of articles, the Schindler article being, I think, the iconic one. But there are multiple articles that people can promote, which take a thoughtful, research informed a view for the support of psychoanalytic psychotherapy. And we use the term that our work is research-based because we think the evidence-based thing is really a very narrow lane to travel in. The other kind of misconception that we are up against is people think psychoanalysis is only for people like people in this meeting. And in fact, actually my entire, career, I've been in medicine now for over 50 years, has been to try to counter psychoanalysis' relative abandonment of sicker patients, and that the people who are most highly trained are the best informed and capable of working with the most troubled patients. The patients who come to Yellow Brick, they can run our skills-based groups better than we can. Because they've been in them for, years and even a decade or more. But that psychoanalysis is not for the walking worried well only, but is the, I think, only singular treatment for, the most deeply troubled patients. And we've got outcome to prove it. And our outcome is not just dependent on the patient, saying that feels great, or the therapist saying I'm great. We have neuroimaging data, which is objective and indisputable to show the work actually changes people's brains as well as their minds. So again, thank you so much for bringing this conversation to us.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jesse. I really appreciate your comments. And I love that research-based phrase, actually. I might borrow that. But we did test.
We share, Linda.
I know. We did test some. We had some questions about the term evidence-based to try to learn what that meant to people. And there were a lot of people who got like, oh yeah, it means like there's like research that backs it up. But the overwhelming take on that was, and we had a lot more research. I didn't present in this presentation tonight, but people said, I really, that doesn't really like, what's most important to me is the therapist's skill and experience. And that is not captured in the phrase evidence-based. Yeah, it's important to know it's been like researched and, works on a bunch of people, but I want to know what works for me. And that's dependent on the therapist. So, there's a lot of intuitively, I think there's a lot that the public kind of gets. But then you have this overlay of this huge corporations and the profit driven corporations. We're up against trying to get messages out with $100 million advertising budget. What can we do to really educate the public on what actually is effective research-based care? It's hard, but I think at PsiAN, I mean, we're committed to doing that, and I know all of you are too. You do that every day.
Dr. Viner mentioned the Schindler article. Is he aware of the work you're doing, or?
Probably.
And Linda, are you connected with Eric Plakin? Okay.
Yes,
'Cause
actually.
he's really trying to organize things at a national policy level.
Yeah. And actually, Eric and I are, we presented a version of this. I presented a version of this at the American Psychoanalytic Conference in February, and Eric was a discussant. So it was great discussion to really, amplify and deepen a conversation about this research. And I think we're going to do an event for Erickson, where that will then, that recording with Eric's comments will be available online. So yes, Eric is incredible and has worked so hard. I mean, really contributed to defining those standards of care in the class action lawsuit.
Do you know Mark Dubofsky?
I do know Mark Dubofsky.
Okay,
Yes.
because he was involved with UBH, and he's a really, I think, powerful resource in fighting insurance companies as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I haven't talked to him in a while, but yeah, he's, yeah. We need people like him fighting the good fight against the insurance industry.
I mean, what, in some way, especially the end of your talk, where you were showing, what we're up against. I mean, that might lead people to feel demoralized or, I mean, what would you have to say to those of us who see that and go, oh my God, how are we going to do this?
Yeah, I mean, I can appreciate that reaction. I feel it a lot frequently myself as well. But I also think that, we have a lot of a lot that cannot be replicated by an AI, a lot that cannot be duplicated in an app. We have a lot to offer the public that they say is most important to them. We're here, we're in their community, we're a human being, we offer a relationship. These are a lot of things that have incredible value. They're the way therapy works, they're how therapy works, they're what people are looking for, and cannot be replicated in an app.
I
So
think some of the things that are, can be taken as discouraging have something to do with kind of the process, because you're polling people, most of whom have not had, 85% have not had the experience of actually being in a relational in-depth treatment, such that they faced some type of, discomfort and challenge, and got through to the other side and can really, kind of hold in their hand the value of it. And so some of their responses, like, I don't want my therapist to talk about the relationship, I think that comes from, kind of where they're sitting, thus far, and the train is kind of still in the station, and that once they get down the track a little bit, they would answer those questions differently,
mhm,
you know.
mhm.
And of course, people are nervous about, the kind of exposure and vulnerability that comes along with entering an in-depth treatment.
And I also wonder if, more in-depth therapists might, like what we experienced at Yellow Brick is that, many of our patients have been through other programs that didn't work. More, manualized based programs and more exclusively CBT or DBT kinds of programs, and they haven't worked. And so they come to us, with a chance to actually dig in deep, and sometimes a little bit frustrated that the system hasn't served them the way they would want to. But I would hope or guess that, people who might do, one of these, Walmart type therapies and then find their way to an actual therapist would say, oh, okay, I get it. I see what this is all about.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think, there's also a big evidence base on supporting psychoanalytic therapy in helping people who with chronic conditions, people who are so I don't like this term, treatment resistant, but right, have had other, exactly kind of what you're describing, Michael, people who've had other treatments, and it's probably due to the psychoanalytic approach, but maybe also, Jesse, what you were talking about, that these are psychoanalysts are the most highly trained. mental health professionals that we have. And so it makes sense to me. And that was, part of also Freud's original vision was having these services available in the free clinics for people of all walks of life. And I think bringing some of that, into the present as well is very important. And yeah, I hope I didn't bum everyone out with all my slides on the latest development in the technology world. But I think it's also, it motivates me because mental health is top of mind for so many people. Stigma is decreasing. More people are open to it. More people are talking about it and seeking it out. And I think it's, it's a prime moment for us to say, well, hey, this is what therapy can really do for you.
Have you had a chance to share any of this, or what do you think about sharing this information with like graduate programs that, maybe mention psychoanalytic thinking in half of a course at one point?
Yeah, that's a fascinating idea. And I know there is research on how attitudes and ideas of graduate students evolve over time with exposure to, psychoanalytic therapy. It's actually very positive. So if there can be creative and compelling ways to teach it that really get graduate students excited and open their eyes to, oh, I didn't know that this is what psychoanalysis was all about. Because of course, whatever they learned in undergrad was kind of even more encrusted. But yeah.
The majority of the students at the Chicago Psychoanalytic Institute are individuals who've been in practice for some significant period of time, anywhere between 6 and 15 years, who have experienced the limits of what their prior training had been and felt a hunger, a yearning, like, I sure hope there's something more because my patients need it, is why they seek the additional training.
Yeah.
All right, this might be a good time to close up. Do you have any last words, Linda, for us? Or, I really like the quadrant that you shared, because it, in a sense, is a concise way for us to think about how we can carry a message out to the public and to our patients.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And no, I know that many of you, are members of PsiAN and support PsiAN. So I thank you so very much for your support, because this is like, we're all in this together kind of a thing. And we have to be when you see what we're up against. But I think that's also, I think the motivating part is that there are things we could do. There are things we can do together. And even, like I said, like you're saying, Michael, the messages in the quadrant, just even, weaving some of that into your website, weaving that into a conversation with your neighbor. That can be a step that you can do. So yeah, there are more of us out there than might feel or be apparent. But I think what we have to offer is of extreme interest and value to the public, and that's what keeps me motivated.
Yeah. Well, and this is really great. Would you feel okay sharing the PowerPoint if anyone wants it, or?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
All right. And so we can get a copy of it, and then people can ask us for it. But,
Okay. Sounds
okay.
great.
Well, thank you very much. And thanks everyone for joining. And again, this was really a treat. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And join PsiAN. Yeah.
Yes, join PsiAN. Absolutely.
All right.
Nice
Thanks,
work.
everyone. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Linda.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Bye-bye.